Welcome to the Wild Holy Podcast, a space where we, like the biblical patriarch Jacob, boldly wrestle the holy in the questions, in the silence, and in the beautiful ache of just being human. We refuse to let go. This is a place for those who feel the pulse of the holy, not only in temples and prescribed ritual, but in the wilderness. We're glad you're here with us. I'm your host, Faith.
And I'm your other host, Stephanie. And today we are delighted to be sitting down with Paul, a contemplative pastor, artist, musician, and other things, whose path to ministry began by the Guadalupe River in Texas around campfires and church camp songs. And as we look forward to hearing about Paul's early formation along that river, there's a really poignant synchronicity as we're holding space for the recent heartbreak of the flooding at Camp Mystic and the young lives that were lost there. So our hearts are with the loved ones that remain and with the people of Texas.
Yes. And in parallel with Paul's story, we find that sacred stirrings and sorrow often share the same ground. And so Paul's encounters with heartbreak and recovery transformed into a ministry that meets people in the deepest places of their pain. He also brings wisdom and a hopeful vision for what church could become.
And also, Paul, you're deeply funny and hilarious. So it's not just pain. There's a lot of laughter and humanity in the midst of all this. So, Paul, before we trace your path into ministry, let's begin at the beginning. So where are you from? And what was the spiritual atmosphere of your childhood like?
Okay. Well, I grew up in Houston, Texas. My family were all transplants, including myself. I was actually born in Kenosha, Wisconsin. But I grew up in Houston, Texas, kind of, in the 60s. The oil industry and the space industry both were drawing a lot of people. There's a huge migration from the north. And so there was a group of people that started a New England Congregational Church in Houston, Texas. I was telling Stephanie, is 3 blocks away from Second Baptist Church, which had 17,000 people worshiping. And
Oh my gosh.
we didn't.
Right.
But, I didn't know it was a big church. Compared to the churches I've served most of my life, there were 300 in worship at First Congregational Church in Houston, Texas. Very progressive in the midst, surrounded by Southern Baptist fundamentalism, and a lot of certainty. And this church, in early days was exploring human sexuality and inclusive language and all the things that just became second hat, in the 90s and 2000s. And we still seem to be fighting some of those battles today, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Did you notice there was a big difference at that age growing up between your church and the church down the street?
I felt like I was swimming against the stream, and I liked it. I mean, that kind of fit who I was. Like I didn't mind, and like I was saying, the church camp on the Guadalupe River was Slumber Falls. It was the South Central Conference of the United Church of Christ has that camp there. They almost lost it a couple of years ago, but a lot of people banded together to save it. And we all had this sort of progressive, loving, inclusive vibe at church camp and in our churches. We'd go home to church and we'd get reinforced in that, and then we'd come together and feel that we were kindred spirits amongst everywhere in Texas. I mean, it's a very red state. There are blue dots, as they say, but I think we were all sort of swimming against the stream.
That's amazing. I mean, that's not a story you hear every day about a kid who grew up in, 1970s and 80s in Houston, Texas.
I know.
Yeah. And I know that music and outdoor ministry were a huge part of your spiritual life. Do you want to talk about those two things? I'm sure they collided. I can see you. I can see you holding a guitar somewhere outside, Paul. I feel like I've seen that image many times.
Actually,
before.
I didn't. I always admired the guy that had the guitar, but I played the piano, which is not convenient for outdoor ministry. So, there were a lot of people that, I always admired the guys on the guitar. So in seminary, I picked up the guitar. So that came a lot later. But yeah, music, singing, vespers at camp was always very. It had a contemplative feel to it. They had a rule where there was like a 20-yard walk through the woods to get from the dining hall where we gathered to Vesper Point, and it was always done in silence. So I think I was trained as a contemplative early on. I mean, I was 10, 11, 12, and I loved that walk, and I loved that we would go and sit down, and you'd look out over the hill country, the Texas hill country, which is quite beautiful when it's not being ravaged by the floodwaters. And yeah, it touched something in my heart and soul early on, I think. And there's still times when I sit down for centering prayer, and the image that comes to my mind is 12-year-old me sitting at Vesper Point and looking out over the hills. So
Beautiful.
yeah.
So you weren't actually doing Vespers. You were going to a place called Vespers Point?
That's correct. Yeah. I didn't learn
It's
until later
very
that that
neat.
was a Benedictine or, a monastic, one of the hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, they called it Vesper Point, and they called it Vespers, but it was in the evening. That fits, right?
It
Isn't
does.
Vespers one of the evening hours?
Yes.
But yeah, that's how I learned that word.
Wow.
That's amazing. So the seeds were already starting to
Yeah.
to be planted in the ground. That's amazing. I mean,
Yeah.
there's something about the freedom of the outdoors that I think is so attractive to so many people, especially for, I don't know if, I'm not assuming that you were this kid, but for a lot of kids who can't sit still in the pews or, don't necessarily resonate with aspects of worship, there's something about outdoor ministry that can be very inclusive to lots of different kinds of folks. Was that
Absolutely.
you, Paul, or?
It was, a little bit. Probably the other piece that's significant is outdoor ministry is relational, and it
Yeah.
was the relationships. It was the deep friendships and a lot of laughter and a lot of fun and a lot of trust built, and some vulnerability along the way. But probably the relationship piece of it was also pretty critical.
And was this camp a camp that you went back to year after year?
As I was growing up, yeah, I have not been back, in 30 years probably. And I get back to Texas a little bit. Most of my family has moved, but I have 2 siblings that are still in Texas, and I'll probably get there maybe this winter. But yeah, it was an annual, at least annual. In high school, there were a couple of times you could go, and I would go whenever I could. I would go.
Great. And how
Yeah.
has that formed your spiritual practices over the years, and maybe even your maybe some other ways in which you've served in ministry over the years as well?
Yeah. Well, for a bunch of, bleeding heart liberals, we were reading the Bible all the time.
Well, you were in Texas.
I was in Texas.
You
So
were
I think
reading the Bible,
I know.
not
It's
just in the
crazy.
pew.
No, in the woods. The other part of camp, and this is probably, as I've grown up and I've seen camp other ways, it's like, oh, that's not just a Slumber Falls thing. That everybody does that at camp. Morning watch, you'd start the morning before breakfast. You'd all go out and find on your own. That was solitude. So it was silence and solitude and nature. A pretty good combination right there. Didn't have to include scripture, but it could. But, and for me, it probably, maybe 50% it did. But other times I'd be really captivated by a plant or a bug or whatever, So practicing those, these were all sort of seeds, like you say, seeds of contemplation. Ooh, there's a good title for a book.
Yeah.
Small group, the intimacy of having we had family groups, so we would work in small groups, and I think all of that sort of formed me to be that particular kind of pastor, that I value stillness and nature and silence and community and relationship. So
as you said, like deeply relational, a small group ministry, deeply relational. Because
Yeah.
we'll get to kind of the new church start and, centering, I don't know how many centering prayer groups you've led over the years, but it's been quite a few. But I believe that you did not want to be a pastor. Is that right? Like that was not
That's true. I resisted the
you were
idea.
too cool?
I was. It wasn't that I was too cool. It was that being a pastor was too nerdy. is there a distinction
What's the
there? I
difference?
don't know.
No.
That is very different.
If you want there to be, go for it.
I was going to be a different kind of nerd. I was going to be a music nerd or some other kind of nerd. I wasn't going to be a church nerd. Yeah, my sister said early on, I don't know, high school or so, and she's like, "Paul, are you going to be a pastor?" And I was like, "No." I was so offended. I don't know why. It's stupid. Anyway, so yeah, I resisted the idea. I warmed up, obviously, to it eventually, and became a pre-seminary, sort of seminary-bound young adult.
But so when you were in college, though, as you started to think, vocationally, you wanted to go into music. So was that what your degree was in? Was
Yeah, so
music?
I went to a small liberal arts college that was a Methodist school, so it was church related, and it still had strong ties to, we had chapel. They had a Christian education degree that was a music degree, so you could so it was church career, but it wasn't pastor. And so I thought, well, that was a side door I'd get in. I thought that made it acceptable. I'll be a church musician or a Christian ed, developer. But that particular major took up a lot of hours, and I spent a lot of time in the music building and the practice room, blah, blah, blah. So when I somehow through those first couple of years doing that major, I realized, who am I kidding? I'm looking at a career in the church. I might as well just do the real thing, and I talked to my pastor a lot through all of this. He was a very good mentor. That home church, First Congregational Church in Houston, probably produced, in 25 years, probably produced 15 or 20 pastors, that went to seminary and became ordained, largely because of Bob Tucker, this pastor who that was a thing for him. He mentored people into ministry, so, and he with his guidance, I changed my major to philosophy to get a more liberal arts, it could take more hours, spread them out a little bit, get out of the music building a little bit more. And so I did that. I became a philosophy major, got ready for seminary.
That's interesting that he, was guiding you to take philosophy classes. What was the thinking behind that as you prepared for a ministry degree?
Part of that might have been him. He was a University of Chicago graduate, very intellectual, and if there's any complaint I have, as a pastor, as a preacher, he was very intellectual, very academic, very brilliant, and very engaging, but still it was very academic. So that probably was a little bit of him, but he also just thought it was, it broadened your base a little bit. So
philosophy is a common part of a Catholic seminarian's curriculum. Just wanted to say that you take when you're studying to be ordained in the Catholic tradition, you take philosophy first and then theology. Yeah. So it's maybe not so much followed in the Protestant tradition, but it is in the Catholic.
Okay.
Seems like a wise pairing to me, but not typically done in my experience. So that's interesting to hear.
Yeah.
It depends on how intellectual your tradition is, right? Yeah. It was old school probably when Paul was doing it. So, Paul, you made your way to Jaedon Seminary, which is in Missouri. Soupy Missouri. That's how I think of Missouri, as someone who's from Iowa. Humid, hot and humid. And then from there, you served a congregation in Missouri for a while, and then
in Kansas, actually.
Oh, Kansas. Okay, thank you.
Near Kansas City, Missouri, but yeah.
No, that's fair, and it means a lot to people in that region to get it right. So I want to be sensitive to that. But then you, I don't exactly know how the new church start thing kind of emerged in your awareness, but how did that happen?
Yeah. Well, again, the church in the I graduated from seminary in '89, my first church. And human sexuality was something we were all wrestling with and trying to be more inclusive. I was interested in serving an inclusive church, but I was in a small town Kansas church, and could only fight that battle so far. Take that church as so far, and the idea of starting a new church was very appealing to me. And I got it came across my desk into my window that there was a new church start in Iowa that was specifically open and affirming, and it just was very attractive to me. And so that's where I went. I interviewed and went through that discernment process, and so I ended up coming to Iowa to do a new church start. I'm never real sure on the 96, 97, sometime around there.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been
Where about in Iowa?
in Indianola, which is a college town about 12 miles south of Des Moines, so central Iowa, still close to where I am now. My kids graduated from high school there, and we were there for quite a while. But I'm in Des Moines proper now, so
Okay.
yeah.
And what did you find with the new church start that was appealing to you, and what did you like about it once you jumped in?
Oh gosh. Well, I love the people. I always love the people. The people are why I show up, and really fascinating people. It was a fairly you could think in terms of a town and gown. What do they say? Town and gown split for Indianola. There was a Simpson College, which is about a 1,500 student body. Again, liberal art Methodist background, and a lot of the professors were part of this church community. And I loved that. Philosophy major, thinker, explorer. So that was a lot of fun. Yeah, I don't know. What else to say?
Did you find that starting a new church gave you a bit more space than working within an older congregation that maybe had some, embedded ways of being already existing there that you had to kind of tug and pull with?
Well, ironically, and this may not surprise you, I found embedded people and embedded ideas there anyway.
That's fair.
It's the church. It's the church. A unique thing about this is there was a group that left a Presbyterian church. So the Presbyterian was not interested. There was an openly gay man. He happened to be a teacher at Simpson College, and they were not interested in making a place for him. And they actually said, you should check out the UCC. So they did. And they called the UCC office and were interested in starting a UCC church. So a sort of a clump of people came from the Presbyterian church to start this new church. I probably wouldn't have done it that way if I had a choice. It was a lovely experience and they were lovely people, but it's one thing to have a bunch of people that wanted to go to a new church. That's different than wanting to start a new church. And so I was constantly sort of trying to open the door to what would it be like to start a new church? What does it look like for us to be a new church, not just go to a new church? You know what I mean? So, and there's ideas and mindsets that really need to be worked with. I was trying to think of a non-violent way of saying that, broken, busted, whatever. I wasn't really interested in that, but opening minds and creating an open environment where people all felt welcomed and safe.
So I guess I'm really curious about what your vision is for what church could be. It seems that you have a heart for church and community, and you also recognize through living through it and working with those congregations for so long that can be very challenging. So what are the positive, beautiful sides of it? What's your vision for a more beautiful future for the church? A loaded question.
Um, Well, I can't remember who said it. It might have been Brian McLaren, but somebody, I don't think it was Brian McLaren. Somebody, and you guys might know that the church of the future, if it exists, will be contemplative in nature. Do you know who said that? Does that
I
ring a
don't
bell? Okay.
know.
Brian McLaren probably said it. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like
Yeah.
something he might say. So, no big surprise. I am very drawn to the contemplative community worship. Yeah. I've always, the creativity, music and creative arts, visual arts,
Mhm.
I always have wanted a church to have that kind of aesthetic, I guess, that when you're there, you're among creative, innovative, artistic
Uh-huh.
composers, people, visionaries. I don't know. That's kind of what I have in mind. The ministry I did in Indianola, that new church start, ironically, again, we were way ahead of our time. We were doing coffee house ministry. I went to a local coffee shop and I asked if we could do worship in there, or have coffee shops, So we were doing music and poetry and readings and, whatever, joke telling, it was just like, but having that sort of intimate space, but also public. It was very public. It was open to the public. A lot of times the public didn't always come, but uh, that interactive sort of spirit and space where people are voicing, giving voice to ideas and art and I don't know, imaginative stuff.
I find it interesting that you're seeing a connection. You're intuiting this connection between creativity, imagination, contemplative approach to spirituality, as opposed to maybe more rigid structures. Um, where does that? I mean, I guess we kind of have heard where it's come from for you because of your upbringing and attending church camp, where you're out in nature and in that contemplative space. What other kinds of things make you feel that the sacred is so available in that imaginative, creative space, particularly?
Yeah. Well, I do think it's just in my bones. I mean, I grew up in a family. My dad was a musician and my mom was an artist. Uh, so we all studied music, piano, instruments, choir, the whole bit. My mom got into ceramics. She painted a lot. When I was really young, I would go with her to different painting scenarios, classes, or anyway. So she always invited me to do some art with her, and she got into ceramics, and we had a wheel in a workroom in our house, so basically a
I would
studio.
love that. You're
Yeah,
so
so
lucky.
we were throwing pots, and sometimes my mom literally was throwing pots because she would get very angry, and f-bombs would be dropped, and she's throwing clay, but yeah, I got my hands into that, so that was a lot of fun. That was in Houston as well, and Houston had a very strong art scene, I guess would say. But I don't know if that answered. I don't remember what the question was, but
Well,
yeah, I think
just a
the family I grew up in, you couldn't escape. If you had a creative bone in your body, it was going to be nurtured. So, and it was for me and a couple of my siblings.
well,
Definitely.
I think I remember learning from Stephanie that your mom encouraged you to not use coloring pages
That's
so that
right.
you would not be confined by those lines, which I kind of love that idea.
Yeah, yeah.
Although it seems a bit extreme if you're just, out of hand hearing that. So tell me about that.
Well, yeah, I see that today, and if my mom would have known that the coloring book industry would be $1 billion industry today for adult coloring books,
Yeah, right.
she might reconsider. And I have the same reaction. People, they'll see my mandalas and they'll say, "Oh, I love, here's my
They're
mandala
beautiful, by the
coloring book."
way.
Yeah, thank you. And I have, this little voice of mine. It's my mom's, critic. Like, that's not really coloring a mandala. This is, it's like, it
Yeah.
is coloring a mandala. It's not creating a mandala. They're different, right? So anyway,
Baby steps for some people, I
I
think. Baby
know, and
steps, right?
I'm trying not to be judgmental,
Yeah.
but I am.
I know, I'm with you. I don't know if you know, but I have my degree in music performance. I was a
Oh,
trumpet player for
okay.
many years. And my husband's a professional musician. So the
Oh,
creativity around my household runs strong as well.
yeah,
So I'm very intrigued by this connection between creativity and spirituality. It seems that there's, for me, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this as well, that something is opened up within us to receive something beyond ourselves.
yeah,
That the creative vision and the spiritual vision are so similar that maybe even they're the same thing.
yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I have some experiences as a, I don't know, 16, 15, 16-year-old. I was the youngest of six, and by the time I came along, by the time I was in high school, everyone else was gone, and my parents were kind of like done parenting. So they traveled a lot, and so I had a lot of time at home by myself, which wasn't good for the alcoholic in me, by the way.
Mm,
But it was, I would sit at the piano sometimes. I'd have a whole weekend, to myself, and it was a very spiritual encounter, me and the piano, and
mhm.
learning some improvisation and just playing, whatever, trying to tune into something beyond myself and finding it was there was kind of surprising and cool.
Well, so since you opened the door, Paul, like
Mm-hmm.
you're not shy about being a recovering alcoholic and addict. And you're also doing, I think, pretty amazing work with incarcerated folks. I know there have been some institutional frustrations,
Mm-hmm.
as there often are, but one aspect of your experience, you know, in that church at Indianola was kind of things falling apart. So do you want to say, do you want to talk about that, Paul? Like
Yeah.
things falling apart? Because it's not, there's always light and shadow in every person's spiritual journey. And it's often through the shadows that we discover more of the light. So
Yeah.
if you want to share that.
Yeah. So the crash and burn, as I sometimes think of it,
Yep.
uh, the job was very demanding in all the best ways. It was very good. I had a lot of success, but it was very demanding on my time, my mental health, my spiritual health, unfortunately. Um, and yeah, I came face to face with my alcoholism. I just found that I was drinking more and more. I was drinking by myself. I was a basement drinker at night after everyone else went to bed. I would drink when I had something to celebrate. I would drink successes. I would drink failures. And it's like eventually that just kind of takes. I had a wake up call. And the church was very, I was very honest with the church, and they helped me get into a treatment program. And so I was in recovery. And then, like a lot of new people in recovery, I wanted to share my recovery, every time I preached almost. It was unhealthy probably to the level of, how public I was in my recovery. I do things a little bit differently now, but I'm still fairly transparent because the women that I serve, 85% of them are addicted to something. So it's actually helpful for me to be transparent and honest about that without just, always that. I thought in my early recovery, I feel like it was just me regurgitating my sobriety and my recovery in ways that weren't that helpful for the church I was serving. But I did end up going through a treatment. I went through a divorce through that time. Yeah, there was it was there was a lot going on and a lot of recovery and rebuilding. That's been pretty good ever since.
And then the contemplative dimension kind of came, I mean, not that it ever left, but it seemed like the volume turned up.
Yeah.
And I think that happened through centering prayer. I could be wrong, but you tell us.
Yeah, yeah. And it was also recovery related. One of the 12
Yeah.
steps is sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact. And my doctor, actually, she was a DO, which means osteopathic medicine. So it's a little more integrative and holistic. And she definitely was in house. So she did some osteopathic stuff with me, but she also was a member of my church, and it wasn't as my doctor so much, but as my parishioner. She invited me to her house. She and her husband, in their living room, they taught me centering prayer. They said, "Have you ever heard of centering prayer?" And I was like, "I've heard of centering. I think I center a lot, but no, this was a discipline and a method." And they told me about it. They had left the Catholic Church and were becoming part of this inclusive community, and they just happened to have this contemplative heart. And I think she was doing that as my doctor / parishioner. I love that that as a pastor, I learned how to pray from one of my parishioners. It's one of my favorite stories of pastoral ministry, that and one of the gifts that I've received is learning how to pray from a parishioner. And so they got me into, and then we started a centering prayer group. We went to a group of us from that church, went to an introductory workshop, and eventually, that planted the seeds for me to get contemplative outreach of Central Iowa started. So
Paul, you've been really involved in centering prayer, not just the organization. I mean, this is your primary spiritual practice, I think.
yeah, I would
And
say so.
Yeah. And I was interested in what you said before, that it bore some resemblance to some like childhood experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Not just, I mean, they're sitting around the piano during the weekend, but also the outdoor ministry at Vesper Point. Um, so I think I said to Paul at one point, just a couple of days ago, I'm not sure that I've known you, Paul, for years, X number of years. It doesn't bear um, going into how many years, but a long time, a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you realize how much of an impact you've made on folks. And I know that's not something you probably wake up with, like, oh my goodness, so many people are more healed, feel listened to, feel inspired by me. But it's true. I think it's really true. So I'd love to hear. You've done a lot of retreat work. We've done some retreats together. I'm also interested in, the incarcerated folks that you're working with. There's a lot of stigma attached to incarceration, a lot of challenges that those folks are facing. So yeah, if you want to, and there's a lot of wild holy in this work in this work too. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So my ministry setting today is called Women at the Well. It's a United Methodist prison congregation that is mostly serving inside the prison. Iowa only has one women's prison, and we're there once a week for worship. We have 2 satellite ministries that we've started since the pandemic. We've been much more restricted in what we can do in the prison, so we've developed a couple of programs outside. And I guess what I want to say about that is, again, it's back to my roots. It really is small group ministry. I mean, when I'm in the prison, we worship maybe 30, 50 would be a lot. Pre-pandemic, we would have 80, and it's just a different world. But it wouldn't be unusual for us to, on a Friday afternoon at worship in the chapel, to divide into 3 groups of 10 or 12 and share some prayer time and smaller, and I just think it's really good for us to have smaller, intimate conversations with those women. They can share a little bit more openly. The 2 satellite programs that we're in other facilities now, similarly, I was at one on Tuesday night, and there were 11 women. That's a big group for us to have 11 women in this one room. But it really is, a lot of times I just sit back and watch the magic, because they support one another. I mean, we offer opening questions, we do some prayer work, some spiritual practices and things like that. But mostly we get to watch them support one another and encourage one another. That is pretty amazing, and very holy to be part of that work, to see them because I can talk till I'm blue in my face. I can give advice, but when one of them speaks, they listen because it's street wisdom, and I've been there, and yeah, they know how to call BS on one another, again, in ways that I just can't. So
Do you find that those women have, an inherent deep wisdom that's just like waiting to be tapped into at does it come forth in those kinds of small groups where
it
the
does. I
spirit is
mean,
allowed to come through?
yeah, that's the actual word that one of my volunteers, he's a United Methodist pastor too. He's retired and older, but he was just like, on Tuesday, he was just like dumbfounded. And he voices this, you guys, there's so much wisdom in this room. That's exactly what he said. There's so much wisdom in this room and how you all speak to one another. It's pretty amazing.
So what do you find that your role is in those kinds of situations, and to kind of open up this, their heart space to be able to find that wisdom within themselves?
Yeah. I Again, some stillness, some breath work, some silence. Prison and facilities, I could lump them all together, are not quiet places. Prison is not a quiet place. It's noisy. There's always chaos going on. And to come to the chapel, if they can, in the facilities, we're in what's called the rocking chair room, which is, you can imagine, a room full of rocking chairs, and which is a really good self-care, self-soothing, trauma informed care that they can sit and rock and self-soothe while they're doing stuff. But just to pause, I can't do that enough. I like, well, let's pause again, or let's take a breath, or let's hold that for a moment, And so just to bring some spaciousness and some quiet into what tends to be chaos. And even honestly, the way they talk to one another sometimes can be very loud and aggressive, probably from trauma. It comes out sideways, and how we might speak more aggressively or loudly than we really mean to. But so just trying to take that down a notch and bring some silence, and some respect and awe into the room, I think is. And I try to bring that, I think my own practice and my own attention to my soul practices helps me be a vessel that shows up in places that radiates, emanates, whatever.
That's what I was thinking. And I was wondering if you feel like you bring an energetic presence that's grounded to that space that helps bring that atmosphere of silence.
I do. I wouldn't have known that 10 years ago, I don't think, but more and more, it's undeniable. So I'm trying to be more and more, to name it, to be open to it, to be aware of it, intentional about it. So yeah.
Have you found any techniques that work well for you, like in the moment? I know centering prayer is a practice, but something like in the moment to remind you to be grounded and to find that center.
It's never just one thing, but how I stand. I know, Stephanie, are you still doing qigong? Yeah. So I've learned some things from qigong practices, of just standing and gathering my energy, realizing that I have energy. That's step one. Oh, I have, I'm sitting this way, and I could be, this way, or I'm like this, and I could be like, so just, it's that, or sometimes it's a breath, or sometimes I will hum a song, but it's never just one thing. But there are many tools in that toolbox that can help me. And the more I hang out with people like you guys, and with Stephanie, and a qigong master here, and a yoga teacher there, the more accessible all of that becomes to me. So
it's about remembering to have that intention. I think that's half the battle, right?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And not always being in an environment where that's, how beautiful that the women can count on that, count on some places and people that are calming and relaxing, or at least trying to be.
Yeah.
That's really important. That's beautiful. I think, I was thinking about when you're on retreat and like the first day of a retreat. Faith, have you done a retreat before? Have you been in a silent retreat?
I haven't. I really want to. Hard to take the break away from family life at the
It is
moment,
hard.
but
Yeah.
yes. On my to-do list.
On your to-do list. The first, if it's a longer retreat, the first day I find is, people are just coming down off the edge. You're just the first, sometimes couple of days, like your nervous system is just getting attenuated to the silence. And maybe you can talk about this, Paul, but during a long retreat, sometimes there's a deeper section of silence. Do you want to talk about that?
It's hard to talk about. I mean, I'm not sure I have the words for it, but
I think you say it with your smile. You just like your face brightened.
I thought it was the sigh, but you're going to say
I was going to say
sigh and smile.
Yeah, sigh, smile.
With sighs too deep for words. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny because I do think it's almost physical. That I think we think of silence as a mental or even a verbal thing, but the last couple of retreats I've been on, and one of them was during the pandemic, and I guess I'm going to share that because we had to be masked, and I was irritated that we had to mask because we're in our own room, sitting in a circle, everybody's vaccinated, everybody's there, and I was irritated we had to be masked, but we did. And I was irritated for the first 30 minutes, and after that, I got past it. And it was just no big deal. But I think the mask actually helped me feel my breath and realize how my breath was slowing down and getting more shallow, and it just was. And what I noticed on that retreat was stillness as a thing. More than silence. It was just like I would be sitting and centering prayer, and maybe it was body awareness. There's like, I am completely still right now. There is nothing moving, and it's not that I was thinking that, but I probably was. And then I let go of that thought, but it was an awareness of stillness that, I don't know. I think that's my answer to your question, Devin, that 2 or 3 days into that, the stillness just becomes palpable. I mean, you can just sit down in the chair and it becomes more accessible. Like it didn't take, 3 sits to get there, or 30, 90 minutes or whatever. It was just like a couple of breaths, roll my eyes about putting the damn mask on again. But then all of a sudden I was there, and the stillness I was enveloped in the stillness. So.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I think that's one of the misconceptions people have about silence, is that it's going to be nothingness. You're just going to be in like an abyss. And that feels terrifying, obviously, to people, understandably. But instead, there is a kind of presence that you are enveloped in, and it feels more real than real life. Often it's like, oh, this has been here the whole time. I didn't know it. I've just been in my own little egoic brain, just like with my agenda and my things and my stories and, the things that we walk around our lives with. And then that stuff starts to drop away. And there's often a sense of deep contentment, peace. Not always, but sometimes. And a kind of fuzziness. I mean, at least I found this to be the case, that where I begin and someone else ends, or where God begins and I'm not really clear. It starts to be the cloud, right? It starts to be the cloud of unknowing. Yeah. And I know this is like, I'm looking at Faith's face. She's got so many questions. I don't know if she has so many questions, but it's a hard thing. It's like describing a foreign country to someone who's never been there. You're like, oh, the food's great. They're like, I'll take your word for it. You have to try these tacos. Okay. But when you have the experience, or let yourself have the experience, you it's, as you said, Faith, it's a privilege, to be able to go on a long retreat. But if you've ever experienced that, even for a moment, it's there's nothing like it. It's really extraordinary. And then you also leave. Like, that's the other thing about a retreat, is like your whole life isn't a retreat unless you're a monk and you're dedicated to silence and community. You leave your retreat and then you forget. You go back to the dishes and back to all the things. Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds to me like there's a bit of a change that happens to you as you enter into the stillness and the quiet. What is that change for you? Like, when you come back from that silent retreat, what is different?
Hmm. I don't know. I want to say everything and nothing. It's like, in a lot of ways, nothing's different than when I left. Yeah, I'm not having words for that. Sorry, but I want to say, I'm less reactive and blah blah blah, but I don't think that's true. It's the same me. I do think there's just probably the one thing that has changed is the awareness, like like what I just described about that stillness. It's like, wow, I became aware of that, and then I take that awareness with me. I mean, that's not a one and done thing. That's an awareness that's always there, or at least it's always accessible.
Mhm.
And then bringing that awareness to every other encounter, conversation, experience throughout the day, throughout my life.
Do you find it's easier to get to that space after encountering it so deeply in a multi-day silent retreat? Are you able to access that easier than you would in a normal everyday life? I guess, I mean, once you enter back into everyday normal life.
Mm-hmm. I think so. I know Thomas Keating and others talk about like a reservoir, and like you're filling a reservoir, and maybe traffic on the way home. I had to drain the reservoir a little bit just to keep my sanity, but I do think you come home with a reservoir that's a little deeper,
Mhm.
and maybe easier to access.
Mhm.
That's probably too mechanical of a way to talk about it, but it's imperfect, but it is what it is.
I think there's something, and you see if you think of this is true, Paul, that having visited this place, whatever the place is, that there's some kind of pathway laid down, and it's a road that you've traveled or been carried along, and it's like a neural pathway. Like
Mm-hmm.
the road gets deeper and deeper.
Yeah,
Doesn't mean you always travel on that road. In fact, sometimes you're like, I'm
right.
not going on that road because I don't want to. Like we have a lot of different ingrained patterns, have often having to do with relationships with other people. But once the tracks have been laid, I don't know. It's a little bit easier to get back.
Mm-hmm. I think that's true. I sometimes think of it as working a muscle. Uh, I think about letting go. I talk about a lot of that in recovery. Let go and let God. That is an actual thing. And in centering prayer, that's all we do is let go
Yeah.
of thoughts.
Mhm.
And then we grab hold of them again, and then we let go of them, and then we grab hold of them, and then we. So you're constantly working this muscle. I'm trying to do my. You're
Mhm.
constantly working the letting go muscle. And what
Mhm.
happens when you work a muscle? It gets stronger. So, yeah,
Mhm.
you come away from an 8-day retreat and your let go muscle is pretty strong. So,
Is that part of what you find is so helpful? I mean, I imagine that you find that centering prayer is helpful for the world at large, and that's why you invest so much. Or maybe you've seen it for yourself, and then you also think it's beneficial for the world at large. Um, do you think that that's a reason why that people it would be helpful for a world to be able to let go a little bit?
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah.
I know
But-
someone. Oh, go ahead, Paul. Yeah.
No, that was it. Yeah. We have a lot that needs to be let go of. I mean,
Yeah.
And can you name any one or two or three things like in broad categories?
probably not very well. I don't know, anger, animosity,
Uh-huh.
expectations,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
addictions,
Uh-huh.
obsession.
Yeah, all the things that are very tightly held to, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I know someone who's in a 12-step recovery process and has been for years. And I think of her now as someone who is like a surrender ninja, because she practices it every day, or almost every day. And I was like, this is the most, like, she's the most, like, emotionally healthy person I know. Because she just practices again and again, and she's like, oh, that I want to fix that. I see that in myself. I can't fix it. Surrender. Or here's a situation over here. If I can do something about it, God will let me know. Surrender.
Mm.
And it is that kind of centering prayer movement of like, oh, I'm tight, I'm clasping, like this is embarrassing to admit, but there's a regularly stationed like homeless population near where I work. And they're asking for money, for cash. And I had $1. Like I never have cash, but I had $1. And I was like, oh, but what if I need that $1? And I went back and forth about it. And then the light changed and I had to turn. And I thought, wow, I am holding tightly to $1? Like, when do I ever need $1? But it was just it's the tightness, the feelings and convictions of scarcity that are so deeply ingrained. And I felt sad that I missed an opportunity, but also just, I had to laugh too. I'm like, oh my gosh, like $1. But that's so much. Like there's so many things like that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's the serenity prayer that I find helpful because in my own background, and I was very readily willing to let go of things that sometimes I shouldn't let go of. So for me, my healing journey has been to maybe reclaim some of those things and to learn what is God's, what is mine, and
Right.
what are the things that I can work towards and hold on to those and work towards those. And then what are the things that I can't and then let them go. So,
Yeah.
it's always, in these sorts of things, there's always a path for everyone that's a little more nuanced. And I know for me, the centering prayer is very helpful on many levels and I love it. But there's also been a part of me that's been like, well, it's not really, sometimes there's another part of that muscle that I need to work that's, holding on to my way of seeing things or being in this world too. So, yeah.
I love that, Faith. Thank you for mentioning that there's a lot of
Yeah.
nuance in these practices, and none of this is a one size fits all. I mean, that's why
Mm.
we're doing the podcast, or at least that's why I'm doing it in part, like for people to just have things that appeal to them or attract them. There's going to be different things. It's all good. I mean, unless they're
Mhm.
doing harm to yourself or others, there's something for you. So, and on that note, Paul, I mean, we've mentioned a lot of centering prayer, and I wondered if you could. We don't have time, I guess, in a way, for like a full 20-minute sit or a 30-minute sit. But if you want to lead us through just the method of of centering prayer as you teach it.
Sure. Well, yeah, for those that don't know, centering prayer is rooted in the Christian contemplative tradition of as a method of just resting in God's presence. And one of the tools is a sacred word. It's a word of your own choosing, light, love, God. It can be a name for God. It doesn't have to be. or a breath or an image. Really, it's an anchor. The sacred word is an anchor. So if there's some other anchor that works for you, that's fine. And then I like the 4 R's of centering prayer. During this time, we retain no thought, we resist no thought, we react emotionally to no thought, and then we return ever so gently to the sacred word when we find that we've wandered or we've engaged in a thought. So resistance is energy that's not helpful for us in this. So we're not actively resisting having thought. And reacting emotionally to thoughts, like here I am trying to pray, and all of a sudden I'm thinking about food or sex or rock and roll, whatever. Now I'm judging myself for thinking about that while I'm trying to be spiritual, right? So having emotional reactions to thoughts is also counterproductive. So we try to just let them be, let them come, let them go. So if you want to take a minute to just sit in that kind of silence.
Yeah.
And we talked a lot about letting go, so you can close your eyes. It's not required. If you're not comfortable doing that, you can just have a downward gaze. You can bring to mind a sacred word image. And that anchor is our connection to God. It's our consent to God's presence and action within. That's our intention in centering prayer. It's a prayer of intent as opposed to a prayer of attention, a prayer of intention. And our intention is simply to rest in God's presence. And when we find we're engaged in a thought, we can return ever so gently to that sacred anchor to remind ourselves of our intention to rest in the goodness of God. Amen.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah. Thank you all. I'm glad you guys are doing this and glad to be a part of it.
Yeah, it was great to have you and just to learn about the sacred and the wild holy in your own life and how you've come to really sit with the holy in quiet, silent ways.
Mm-hmm.
And Paul, you're one of my favorite people in the world. And I love talking to you, learning from you, being with you in person or in, virtual spaces. And I really give God thanks for who you are and the amazing ministry that you've done just by being yourself, which is, I think, often the ministry we do. All these like skills and techniques and experience and knowledge, but actually it is our presence. Like we are hopefully helping people draw closer to the presence by our presence. So thank you.
Thank you to those of you listening for entering the holy quiet with us. Sometimes the best way to reconnect with the sacred and to find renewed grounding is to stop and breathe and listen. So thank you, Paul.
And we will be back soon with more conversations at the untamed edges of the holy. And until then, please be gentle with yourselves and each other.
Take care.